Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Awaken the World. It is 6 p.m. on the 15th day of October in the year of, oh my God, 2021. Live right now, there is no present moment, right here on the Awaken the World group page. Hello, 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 how are you? This time of year, I can't help it. I'm an imp. Veil starts to thin, two worlds start to cross over, and Garen's impish side really starts to manifest. So, as you can tell by the title, of course, it would seem to be counterintuitive, the idea that there isn't a present moment. And I see that Louisa is here. Hello, Louisa. How are you? Much love to you tonight, and much love to each and every one of you. Wherever you are right now is exactly where you're supposed to be. And when you sit back, relax, and learn to enjoy the ride a bit, it can be fun. And, when it's not so fun, there's reason there too, believe it or not. So here we are, 2 weeks before my surgery, and I'm not sure how soon I'm going to get back to videos after the surgery, that's for sure. So we'll make some pretty good use of this time. And we're going to talk about the fact that there really isn't a present moment. And that seems really strange to you, but it's not. So we're going to need to talk about a bunch of things in order to do this. Maybe the first place to begin is with your mind. And with your mind, well, the mind is actually pretty easy to suss out. It's always reactive. It's never here. It's always just outside of here. And I'm going to explain why. And when I say your mind, let's clarify. We're talking about that voice in your head, your egoic sense of self, which doesn't exist either, but we're going to add that in the discussion as well. This is going to be one of these kind of interesting ones again. So, as far as your mind goes, no matter what the experience is, your mind is literally after the fact. It's behind the times. It's never in the present moment. As soon as the ego begins to start the noise, the babble, well, when does that happen? It doesn't actually happen in the beginning of an event or an experience at the moment of the experience's inception. It happens someplace deep inside of that experience, sometimes not through until you're right through the other side of the experience. And, some of the easier examples are, getting caught in a magnificent sunset and being just speechless inside and out for that period of time where the last fading lights of the sun's warmth are disappearing behind the horizon, and the impending doom and terror of what lays in the night begins to manifest. Sorry. Yeah, but that's, that's exactly the sort of experience. It literally kind of freezes us, and there's a stillness there, both inside and out. And in that time, you are actually manifest fully what you truly are all the time. Really. Does that make any sense? Sort of, yeah. You've stepped beyond the boundaries and actually entered into that space that we would call that present moment. And this can happen, well, it does happen, as a matter of fact, with every experience in our lives. The mind is always behind the times. And when I say the mind, I want to clarify, I'm talking about the egoic sense of self, that chatterbox in your head, that thing that speaks to you in your own voice. what that really means is that there is no place where the present moment can actually exist in terms of us trying to identify it. Because in the moment we reach out to try and grab it, of course, it's actually no longer the present. And the egoic mind loves to chop things up into what it would, define as discernible or literally definable pieces, i.e., our sense of time. And we're going to talk about that too. Tick, 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 second after second after second, minute after minute after minute. But at a mind level, the mind doesn't understand that even though there is only this eternal present, that eternal present is actually liquid. It's not a block or a solid that can actually be chopped up. So at any moment, the present moment is available to you because that's the only moment there actually is. So it's not like there's anything special about the present moment. The thing that's special is actually being able to pull your being into it. Because as I said, the moment there's any sort of activity going on in that egoic sense of self, that present moment experience no longer exists. So when we talk about the present moment, we're certainly not in the present moment, because in the act of trying to talk about it, the present moment has already left town. And yet it hasn't, because it's always here. And I know that sounds a little confusing, but it is something to realize, that there is no time where the voice in your head is happening that you're actually fully present. If that voice is going on, you're lying slightly in the past or slightly in the future as a projection, forwards or backwards, because neither one of those can actually happen. But this projection is what you would assume to be you. And that projection exists in that space, forward and backwards from the now. And in that present moment, in that true fluidic moment of now, a moment that will forever escape ego's ability to see, your true underlying identity is simply obvious in that. It is still. It is incredibly deep. There's a hum of life to it. And the separation disappears between any concept of you or I, or this or that. You are all of it and part of all of it. And this is probably a good time that we get into time, for a time. And try and dispel a little bit of the confusion, so that it's easier to understand why time plays into things in our egoic sense of self, but really doesn't serve much other purpose. So, Kelly's been doing, part of Kelly's course is in doing an indigenous program on the First Nations. And it's been a real eye-opener to Kelly, because, she was raised in that sort of white settler Christian mentality, and the people around her didn't have a very good impression of the First Nations people that they knew or saw. And in this experience, she came to understand that, You know, when the first European settlers came here, that there was no knowledge of time. There wasn't a use of time. There wasn't a standard of seconds and minutes. The First Nations communities didn't use that. And of course, once they began to be corralled, those that were left and weren't murdered and killed and whatever else happened, I mean, the horrific things that happened, that they would have to show up, for an interview on time or for an appointment on time. And of course, they didn't have a concept of time. Now, we look around and we think, well, we simply wouldn't be able to survive without time, when in fact, we actually survive quite fine without time, because the whole concept of time really is an illusion. So let's dig in a little deeper so there's a better understanding of it, okay? So you can't have space without time, and you can't have time without space. So in the creation of this universe, you really needed three things. You needed some matter, or some energy that could masquerade as matter at some point, right? In some appearances. But you needed that energy, or let's call it matter. And you needed to be able to expand or create space. Why? Because this energy had to go into something, and that had to be a space. And there was one other thing that you needed, and that was a result of the first two, and yet birthed by, and actually they were all really messing with each other, come to think of it, kind of ew. But in reality, they're all simultaneously giving birth to each other. So you can imagine that expanding bubble of what we would call our universe, or space-time. And the reason we say time is because that's literally what space is. So we say that Garen is fixed in this point in space, and if he were to move to that point in space, it's going to take a certain number of units of time to get there. But what's actually moving? Aha. And this is where things begin to get a little bit maybe on the heady side, but also can offer a very deep insight into the higher truths of the way what we would call the spiritual plane works, our highly energetic plane functions. So the idea is that Garen, in order to get from point A to point B, has to experience something called time. And in that time, that time isn't really recording the movement so much as it's recording the length of time it takes to get from A to B. It's measuring the start and it's measuring the finish. And at any point in between there, you have to stop, and using the start as your guide, or the finish line, depending, if you're assuming your trip's going to remain the same, to determine your time in to the journey, you have to have a point that you look at. But we already know that it really doesn't exist, and that the present moment of now is actually a very fluid moment. And it has to be, because it's constantly being filled and emptied with everything. Everything that's occurring right now has to be consistently renewed within that present moment. If it's not renewed, we consider that a death of some sort, or a change of some sort. all within that eternal present moment of now. And we would say, of course, that it takes time. So, in order for our egoic sense of self to even exist, as a matter of fact, again, the three of them, and you notice that these things are happening in threes, and that plays into a few other things that we can talk about too. But these guys are actually doing each other again. It just drives me crazy. But this is the truth of it. Our past and the idea of a future is what births ego. The past and future are the ego. The ego cannot be fully within the present moment. That's why when you have one of those true present moment experiences, you cannot find yourself within the experience. And that's because that conceptual self, that egoic sense of self, is literally birthed by the past as it's birthing the past, as the future is birthing the past and the ego is birthing the future, and I'm confused already, and it's just, yeah. So that big ménage à trois of ego and past and future is the culmination of ego. And we already know that past and future don't exist. Ergo, ego doesn't exist either. Now, that doesn't mean that ego is not valuable. When we're talking about things that are not existing, what we're really talking about are things that are not only impermanent, but their very form itself is literally an illusion within that illusion. And in truth, it is non-existent. And yet, I am very sure that I'm sitting right here and that I exist. And I have wonderful memories of things. And I have some terrifying memories of things. And I wish for a future even though I know it's not really there. Until it is. But in truth, the birth and death of ego is all tied up in the transmission, finally, usually only at death, the physical death, from dwelling in the past and projecting in the future, which is ego itself. And then after that, of course, in the cessation, the loss of ego. And the loss of ego isn't really the loss of ego. It's just the final stillness of it. But when you understand that you could take that label off and stick ethereal memory bank, you know, a memory bank that happens to be self-aware and skittering to and fro upon the surface of the planet. This is really what our sense of self is. It's that culminated total of all those experiences that it has had, past tense, and also a culmination of everything that it thinks may happen in the future, forward tense. But if truly present, there is no ego anymore. Because the mind is only a reactive device. The input comes in regardless of whether or not the mind is consciously processing it or not. It is being processed on that subconscious level of being. Just from our sensory input, physical sensory input side alone, we're consciously able to pick up about 3,000 pieces of sensory input every day. Meanwhile, anywhere between 10 and 20,000 of them are actually being recorded at a subconscious level of being. This subconscious level of being we could call the self-aware hard drive's Google Cam. It's taking in everything, and because it's making no comment and it's just devouring that sensory data and making no decisions and nothing else, and not acting out of that any other point of awareness, that is that original data storage device. Right? And then the overlay is what we would call the ego. And the ego is really a filter which takes a portion of that data coming in and has an opinion about it. And that's why it's always reactive and truly could only exist in the past or future. Because in this present moment, there's nothing to say. There's no experience to have that involves the egoic sense of self. It is only after the experience that the mind actually starts to kick in. So, why is this important at all? And the reason it's really important in my mind is that we're, quite frankly, unaware of it most of the time. So all the devastation that we're experiencing wholesale from climate change, this devastation, didn't happen yesterday. It's ongoing. But all the processes that occurred, all the thoughts, words, and deeds lie in the past. As I said when I talked about the IPCC report, that data was based on data up until the end of 2019. It did not include any 2020 or 2021 data. The new one coming up in November, December here is going to have data right into the end of 2020, but not into 2021. This is what I mean about always reactive, always in the background. The thoughts, words, and deeds that brought us to this point are long old. And we're reaping the remnants. The fact that we're continuing to behave the same way simply means that we're going to continue to see these remnants for a long time to come. When you start understanding that your egoic point of view is really stuck looking into the past at all times, and sometimes dreaming about a future, but usually based on the past, you can then become just that little bit more self-aware that there is no point in resisting or standing up against what appears to be happening right now. And this is why standing against anything only ends up exacerbating the issue for everybody. The thoughts and words that are leading up to the deeds are past tense. The act happening right now is a monument. It's a leftover. It's like the Great Pyramid. If you leave it alone long enough, it's going to fall apart all by itself. Focusing on the monument will never change anything. The way to initiate change in the world for yourself and for the whole planet, for all of humanity, is to understand that you need to start with new thoughts, words, and deeds that are supportive and creative, that don't represent a reaction. And to understand that ultimately, there is no present moment that you, as your named egoic sense of self, will ever be able to access. And that's okay. There's a larger, grander part of yourself that you can get in touch with and experience that true present moment. The present moment where you are no longer you, but you have become everything still again. Both, depending on your point of view. That's it. That's all. I will not try and scramble your brains any further tonight. What day is it today? Friday. I've got a lot of labs and other crazy appointments and things like that prior to my surgery, but we will be doing videos right up until actually the 28th, the Thursday. Kelly will have a course that night. So I'll probably do a video earlier in the evening on the 29th of the surgery too. And of course, happy Halloween. Remember, if I go, I'm haunting you all. Namaste. Have a beautiful night. I mean it. I will.